Hello, welcome to On the Bench. I don't know why I said hello like that. It was kind of weird. I'm your host for this episode. Hello. I'm your host for this episode, Brennan Marion. I'm joined by Zach Blostein with his pretty little butterflies in the background, and Chris Nee, who is furiously confirming official visitors for the Charleston Southern weekend. Oh, what a list it's going to be. For this episode, we're going to get into basically an outlook for the offseason and what we think would be a successful offseason for Florida State. Granted, it's relative at this point, but like in all seriousness, I do think setting a tone for what we expect, what we think is reasonable, what we would like to see happen to feel like, okay, you have a chance to push this in the right direction. Because obviously Mike Norvell faces an uphill climb. Like the hole they found themselves in it feels insurmountable, but we've seen in college football is you can turn things around quickly. Can you turn this around? We will see. But I want to kind of set a standard and set a tone for the offseason so we can go back and reflect on it once the dust has settled and kind of have something to gauge it by. I think that'll be an important tool and something that maybe we should have done a better job of last year if we're doing self-reflection on how we covered the team. Before we get going with a few other items as well, shout out to our sponsors. First off, Chattanooga Whiskey. I got a beautiful bottle of their 111 proof here. We've talked about that being a gold standard for value whiskey out there. This is actually their Distiller Select from 2023. Oh, it's kind of glaring there. You can't see it. And you can't get this bottle, but you could get like their 2025 one next year at their distillery. And it's just like a special like single barrel selection that they do, and this one's awesome. It's got like notes of legit caramel apple, and the thing I love about Chattanooga whiskey is they take so much time to craft the whiskey and are very thoughtful with what they do. Like this has got yellow corn, malted rye, caramel malted barley, honey malted barley is their mash bill. They're freakishly transparent in how they age it and what they tell you is in the cooperage and the filtration, and then they give you all sorts of cool flavor profiles too that are unique to Chattanooga whiskey and the Chattanooga region, and gives you different elements of flavor that you can't really find anywhere else. So Chattanooga whiskey, they're 111 proof. Go give it a try. If you want something a little bit lighter, their rye whiskey is awesome as well. So please give them a try if you haven't already. I know we've had many users go ahead and add that to their whiskey collection, and they love Chattanooga whiskey because it's an awesome product. And if you're looking to get in the housing market and maybe you drink a little bit of whiskey and you're like, hey, I want to buy a home. You know who I would suggest you guys talk to?
The Turner Group.
Yeah, exactly. The Turner Group. Colin and Amy Turner are awesome people. They do a phenomenal job in making the home buying, home selling, whatever part of the spectrum that you're on there, trying to make that as easy as possible. They are super people, and they are extremely well connected in the state of Florida. They're able to get you literally where you want to go. I know Colin has been bumming this season. It's almost over, Colin. You're going to be good. Off season is nearly among us here. So before we get into outlining what we want to see this offseason from Florida State, a little bit of recruiting action real quick. And by recruiting action, I mean FSU got a commitment from a kicker and then is starting to bleed out of its, as Chris said before, the podcast, every orifice, I think is what we said. And we outlined what all orifices are, every orifice for this recruiting class. So, Zach, let's get into it here. Who is FSU losing?
Yeah, well, they've lost two prospects already to Florida in four-star quarterback Tramel Jones, who flipped to Florida, and then three-star offensive lineman commit Daniel Pierre-Louis, who was on an official visit this past weekend to UF and subsequently flipped his commitment to the Gators. And it might not be over. Four-star running back Byron Lewis took an under-the-radar visit to UF last weekend that was not widely reported. And, I checked in, and that visit did take place. I guess he had communicated it to Florida State in some manner, but from what I heard, it didn't sound like something that was communicated well, because it sounded like he kind of said, like, he was just kind of passing through, and, he didn't really talk to any of the coaches on the visit. But, well, I think that's probably not the case because he has an OV set to UF, a return visit set to UF this weekend for their game against Ole Miss. And, it sounds like that recruitment is kind of starting to trend towards Florida's favor. They already have 2 running back commits. Florida does. It sounds like they maybe, could add him and decide what to do with one of their running back commits. But yeah, I mean, if FSU loses Byron Lewis, they would have no running back commits in the 2025 class. And that's after missing on one of their top targets that they've been recruiting for the last 4 years in Usman Kroma to Georgia. Obviously, that's a tough battle for FSU to win right now because of where they're at in the context of the season. But I mean, you needed to win one of those 2, and you can't fathom losing both because you don't really have any other running back targets to turn to that we know of at this point. So yeah, not a good stretch for FSU on the recruiting trail. Less than 2 weeks to go until National Signing Day, which is on December 4th on a Wednesday. So we got, as of yesterday on Wednesday, it was 2 weeks away. And it's not looking great. There are other guys at FSU's class that seems like on the verge of getting poached. Kevin Wynn, the 4-star D lineman. It's felt like for the last 2 months, it's just where is he going to flip to?
I legitimately forget that he's in this class sometimes.
I always
so do people interviewing him sometimes.
People ask me who do you think's going to flip? And I even forget to bring him up because I've already considered him kind of out of the class. He's definitely one it seems like he's trending to South Carolina right now. But Georgia, USC are both in Texas are trying to make moves on him as well. Solomon Thomas will be interesting. He was at UF this past weekend and, got to watch the Gators beat LSU, which is another one of his top teams where he'll actually be this weekend for a visit. I confirmed yesterday again that that's the plan for Solomon Thomas to visit LSU this weekend. Mario Nash, the 4-star offensive lineman, is considering LSU as well, along with the 2 in-state Mississippi schools in Ole Miss and Mississippi State. Peyton Joseph, the 4-star offensive lineman, is visiting Georgia Tech today on Thursday, and it's possible that he goes to Georgia this weekend. Hey, a positive note, Chase Lofton, the 4-star tight end commit, he told me that he thinks he's going to stick with Florida State after a strong push from Nebraska. And checking in, behind the scenes on that recruitment, it sounds like that checks out. His communication with FSU has been pretty positive as of late when it comes to the chances of them holding on there. Chris Thompson, some of the other staffers involved in that recruitment have worked really hard to try and keep him in the class. And it sounds like as of right now, they have a good shot to do that. But obviously these things can change. And then, they landed a kicker commit. Chris, tell us about the kicker.
Bruno Roos. I'm probably mispronouncing that. I apologize to Bruno. He's a young man that was committed to USF. He is from Venice, Florida. He's a high-level kicker and punter, very highly ranked by Cole's Kicking, who's a kicking-specific website that worries about kickers and punters. He has been to FSU regularly throughout the season. I think he's been to 2-3 games at least. He kind of got offered by FSU in July. At that point, I believe it was a PWO type offer. About a week ago, I think last Sunday it was, he got the full-fledged come here offer from FSU and decided to flip towards the Seminoles. He's probably coming in this upcoming weekend for an official visit, working to confirm that 100% with him. To add to what Zach was talking about, Mario Nash did tell me that he expects to be at the FSU Florida game. Not sure if he'll go anywhere this coming weekend at 23rd. Wherever he goes this weekend, that'll probably kind of set the tone of who FSU is probably battling to the end with in that one. Mississippi State has kind of relented in their belief that they can get him back in their class, from what I understand. So there is that note on him. We shall see. Speaking of Mississippi State, Max Redmond, FSU commitment, is supposed to go there this weekend for an official visit. I caught up with Max a few days ago. You can read the story with him. He was pretty straightforward about taking a visit, where things stand with FSU. I think Max, like some other defensive back commitments, are keeping an eye on what their position coach does moving forward.
All right. It's a great positive way to start off the podcast. Happy Thursday morning, guys.
Well, they're what? They're at 12 commitments right now. We're talking about roughly 4 or so of them that certainly feel like they could go either way at this juncture. I think they have 7 decommitments so far in this class. Say they lose half of those, so that pushes you to 9 decommits. There's a outside possibility the decommitment class is higher ranked than the actual commitment class at the end of the day.
I was just
And
thinking
the weird thing is, I think Sedone or Zach brought that up like 6 weeks ago, 8 weeks ago, and now we're here.
It was probably me because I got a weird mind, and I was actually doing math a few weeks ago. So that was probably. But yeah, they just have not won games, and they've literally only won a game. So that's
now you're firing people, so relationships go away too,
this
and
is
uncertainty of the future and all those things are a bad formula.
Yep. All right. So the future is all you have to look forward to because the present's pretty damn bleak right now. And the road back is going to be arduous, and it's not going to be easy if you can't even get there. Right? This isn't going to be us saying, "Oh, this is something that is possible." We don't know. This is uncharted territory. I think Bill Conley with ESPN did something the other day in which he looked at the drop in win percentage from year over year, and FSU is going to if they end up beating Charleston Southern, which they're I think 30-point favorites or so, which is kind of wild because they haven't scored more than 21 points all season. But Charleston Southern's dreadful and they're a 1-win FCS team. So, but of course they're running this triple option offense, and God only knows how this defense is going to handle a triple option offense. But I digress. Let's say you end up with 2 wins. It would be among the I'm going to not phrase it correctly, but the percentage drop off would be among the worst 8 all-time drop-offs year over year from win percentage in college football history. And among those 8, I think 4 of them happened before the 1950s. So they could have been World War II related drop-offs. And so what we're looking at is historic. It's unprecedented. That's the context that I'm not trying. I know I'm being snarky. I'm not trying to be it is unprecedented. And so the road back, what it would look like, is also going to be unprecedented, right? It's just going to be a thing that if Mike Norvell does figure this out, we don't know what the right moves are going to be. There's not a playbook for it, I guess is what I'm trying to say. In the ultimate, the betting odds would say Mike Norvell doesn't figure it out, but he's going to get a chance to. And the fact that he has shown that he can win at a high level at a program like Florida State just 2 years ago, 23 wins over 2 seasons, there's at least some glimmer of hope. So how do you get there? I've taken some time and thought about different things that I want to see from FSU this offseason, things that would make sense to me, whether it's moves in the coaching ranks, front office stuff, roster building philosophies. And so I'm dropping that in Knowles 24/7 each day. But I wanted to go over that list with you guys, get your thoughts on it, see if yes, that makes sense. No, this is what the caveats would be, and kind of just flesh it out for our listeners here to go ahead and get an idea of the thought process. So with that in mind, number 1 for me, guys, is you hire an offensive coordinator with a play calling pedigree because you want him to be your play caller. I think that's...
Yes, because you have to hit reset and refresh it and figure it out and go a different direction.
Yeah, I think it's not that I'm not one to say that Norvell's play calling has been bad this season, overall. But I just think, like Chris said, you need to, for the messaging and the symbolism of it, you need to show people that you are this is a hard reset, because you just outlined, we've never seen a drop off, this bad before. It's, historic. So you need to make some historic changes to this program, and to Mike Norvell himself. And yeah, I agree. I think part of that is going to be him giving up play calling and hiring someone to run this, their own offense at FSU.
I also think it is beneficial for Mike to become more CEO, more over everything than hyper focused on that. And he does involve himself in everything currently, but he's obviously also hyper focused on the offense.
Yeah, it takes up a lot of his time.
Go ahead, Zach, because you've written about that, and that's at Knowles 24/7 for VIP subscribers. But you've written about Mike with the CEO role, and I think that's when I wrote about him hiring a play caller. Like that's what I had in mind is like for him to be able to divert his energy. Because I'm with you. I don't think it's a bad. I don't think he's a poor play caller, right? Like I think they've given. There's a ton of plays being left on the field. They're one of the worst teams in the country in drops. They can't run the football right now. Like there's things that
it's more about personnel than the play calling, in my opinion.
And so that's what it would free up some of his time, right?
Yeah. It's got to be the number one focus of the operation moving forward is the talent acquisition strategy and shifting it. It's something that we've talked about at length on here, but having the head coach more involved in making sure that part of the operation functions the way it should is by far, in my opinion, the most important thing that Norvell needs to accomplish moving forward. And freeing up time for that. Like, I mean, we've been told that, there were times in like the portal window where, Norvell would be in the middle of game planning for the Orange Bowl, which is crazy to think about. And that would like slow down FSU's efforts like in the portal because they had to get him to like be like, oh, sign off on something. Because he was in the middle of a game planning meeting that lasted 3 hours or whatever. Like that can't happen moving forward. Like you can't afford to lose that, precious time in a portal window, or, that he needs to be more readily available to call recruits. Like there are a bunch of different things when it comes to their talent acquisition strategy that him as the head coach needs to be more involved in. And giving up his offense to another play caller should allow him to have more free time in the day to be able to accomplish those things. And I think it's, by far, in my opinion, the most important step towards rebuilding this program.
So we're about to go on we're all in agreement here. We're about to go on a stretch here of, to Zach's point, personnel acquisition being first and foremost. A lot of this is going to be focused on that. We're about to go on a bit of a stretch here, but that's all kind of integrated into what I'm talking about. Next up for me, number 2, hire a defensive coordinator who can immediately attract blue chip talent. That does not mean they have to be an ace recruiter as a defensive coordinator, but it has to be someone who's either coming from a program where they can bring in some high-end transfers, or someone who has some sort of ability to be an asset for you when you're pitching to future prep recruits and whatnot. Basically, they can't be a zero for you on the recruiting trail. They can't be someone that you have to, or a net negative. So the defensive coordinator has to be a good play caller and at least a above average recruiter.
Yeah, so I'm not pushing back on this because I agree in the premise versus the dismissal of Adam Fuller versus who they hire and the need for that to be an improvement from a recruiting standpoint. I agree with that wholeheartedly. Coordinators tend to be involved in the identification of prospects and less involved in the recruiting. Now they are involved, especially when they step on campus, in the sense of selling the vision, selling the idea of what the defense is or offense in an offensive coordinator situation, and then being able to help close because, hey, I can coach, come here. You're going to excel in what we do defensively. You're the kind of player I want, those kind of things. But I also think a defensive coordinator's first and foremost job is be great at coordinating a defense. And I know that sounds simplistic, but that is the case. I think, Mark Stoops comes to mind for me. I think Mark Stoops had such a great vision for defense and for the type of players that he wanted that did a lot of his recruiting for him. I don't think Mark Stoops was some elite, out of this world, blow your mind recruiter. I think he was an effective recruiter, but I don't think he was like a top tier recruit. He wasn't Eddie Grant, James Coley, those kind of guys who like recruiting is their DNA. So I guess I land in the middle kind of on that response, but like at the same time, yes, it's important for them to be a capable recruiter, but it's more about selling the vision than simply being a guy who can go, sell ice to an Eskimo.
I think part of the caveat is, so think about in the last, Chris, how long have you been covering the program for?
22, 23 years ballpark.
So you've seen a lot. Who's
Mickey,
been the best?
from a
Who's been the
defensive
single best
coordinator
defensive
standpoint,
coordinator? Hang on, who's been the single best defensive coordinator performance that you've covered during your time here?
probably Mickey, but I also got Mickey at the tail end of Mickey. But I grew up watching Mickey coach defense, and Mickey was phenomenal at coaching defense. I really think highly of Mark Stoops as a defensive coordinator. I think he was very good at it. And I know some people didn't love how his defense played in the sense of aggressiveness and some of that, but in the sense of building it, putting it together, I think Mark was pretty unbelievable. Jeremy Pruitt, dogged recruiter, also a hell of a coach. Personality wise, not particularly real good in that department. Always kind of amazed me. Ended up a head coach at an SEC school.
A bit of a red
that
ass
element of it. But like Jeremy knew great players. I mean, I remember him walking in the door and telling me, I'm going to go get DeMarcus Walker. I'm going to go get Jalen Ramsey. And obviously those two are both Billy Badasses who are now entering, double-digit NFL careers for a reason. And then he went and put together a really good defense. They had that weird start to that year, the BC game, for example. And then he sort of figured it out, and they excelled. Now, a decent amount of the talent he was playing with were guys that were assembled by a prior defensive coordinator. So there has to be some credit there, too. I think Mark's a really good DC. So I guess, like, straight-up coaching chops, it would probably go Mickey, Jeremy, and Stoops are in a very similar category to me. Different mentality. Jeremy's probably the better recruiter of the two, but I think Mark's a phenomenal identifier of talent.
So all those guys being part of the talent acquisition process, I think is kind of where I'm getting at, is like, yes, the first and foremost is you're going to have to be great at constructing a defense, and whether that's in-game play calling, your evaluation skills, how you coach it and teach it and implement it, during the week. But it cannot be a net negative. And I think that's my main point, is it can't be someone is going to, especially in this immediate, because you need to win in 2025. You need to get back to some semblance of winning football. They're going to have to be attractive to portal prospects. I think that's the caveat there for me. Anything else to add to that? Nope. All right. Cool. Next up, you're going to have at least one or two position coaches you're hiring on offense. We believe probably on defense as well. One of those hires on each side of the ball has to be an ace recruiter, or someone with the capability to be an ace recruiter, even if they're not proven. Someone who is recruiting first and foremost, and they want to go get after it and be an alpha dog.
Absolutely.
Go ahead, Zach.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. That's, like I said, that's got to be the biggest focus of the operation moving forward. And, oftentimes, like Chris said, like coordinators, I feel like you typically aren't the ones you'd characterize as ace recruiters. And I think those are the two spots that you probably want to focus on, their coaching chops more than their recruiting ability, in my opinion, when comparing it to the assistant coaches, actual specific position coaches. And I think on offense and defense, there are certain spots like, on offense, running back and receiver coach and tight ends coach. Like those are spots where you want to put good recruiters at. And on defense, I mean, linebacker, D-line, and even DB. Like I feel like you can find some good ones there. So yeah, I mean, I absolutely agree. What that looks like, it's hard to tell right now. And I think like, when you're trying to project out who's going to be the receiver coach, who are they going to bring in to be the O-line coach, a lot of that's going to be dependent on who the OC and DC hires are, because they're going to have a big say in the hires that are made on their side of the field. So, I'm interested to see how, hiring a specific OC affects the hires of, certain coaches at certain positions. Do they bring guys in with them from their previous institutions? That'll be an interesting dynamic to watch. But yeah, I mean, I absolutely think that you need some dog recruiters on the staff on both sides of the football.
I think it's important to have somebody that loves to hunt, like really, really enjoys being in the fray of battling for really high level players, or going and finding players who they think can be great players and being ahead of the curve on that. And I think the other thing is having a guy or two, maybe one on each side of the ball, who is a relationships guy. He is willing to sit down and call any and all targets at all positions and build a relationship and always be a point of contact. So if it for whatever reason slips off with somebody else, they always have that person, and that's the old school recruiting coordinator. And I think there's a degree of whether that person is an on-field coach or in a front office position. I think it's essential for FSU to have that, and for it simply to be someone who's A, an evaluator, B, a recruiter, and C, a relationship builder, and all of those things have to be treated equally.
I was speaking to a coach at a different P4 program recently, and just kind of picking their brain about some of the things of what they've seen, from far away at Florida State. And one aspect they brought up that stood out to me, and it's very simple. It's just they don't have alphas. They don't have alpha dogs on the recruiting trail.
Who is FSU's biggest recruiter from the staff that's now being disassembled? Like, who is it that builds the most relationships, connects with kids most, is probably most well-liked by the kids?
Yeah, I mean, Atkins is probably up there just from a pure, recruiting.
I think it's Norvell.
So, all right, two things. So on Atkins real quick, I think what ended up, Mike's answer the other day when asked about recruiting and how much that'll play a role in hires, he talked about, yes, he wants someone who is going to be really good at the evaluation process and building relationships, but then development as well. So that makes me think that that's going to always be part of his ethos, right? Is development. But he did
coaching and development, yeah.
Yep. But one little sliver in there that was he basically wanted someone who enjoyed that process. And I do think with Alex Atkins, he was a great, I'm sure still going to be a great relationship builder wherever he is. He also kind of soured on the idea of recruiting out of high school for a couple of years there, and didn't think that was necessarily the way to go. And thought he can go into the portal and get things there quickly at all times. And
he's not the only one that went that direction, but yeah, that's true.
Correct. But that is an example of it, and I think that's a recalibration. And I think Alex, if he had stayed, would have shifted back to going into the high school ranks more. We were starting to see that with this prep class.
I guess I think his biggest issue was the development piece with those high school prospects. I did a story at the beginning of the season where I think he had signed 15 guys since he had been at FSU over the 5 years. And I think at the beginning of the season, before Andre Otto got into the lineup, only one of his 15 guys had started for FSU.
And that was Thomas Schrader?
No, it was Rob Scott.
Thomas Schrader did start a game.
Yeah, I think he started
one game in 2020.
Yeah, but he transferred.
He
out.
technically was before Atkins. I think Atkins signed him, but he was committed.
Yeah, I didn't include Schrader, Zane Herring, and one other guy because those are guys that he inherited in that class.
Yeah, and then Jalen Early joined that. Andre Otto joined that. Mixed results in both of those cases. Lucas Simmons was a guy that they invested a great deal into with hopes there. He very much lost his first year. This year's been a struggle for him. We shall see. He was sort of the great hope at tackle in the sense of a true tackle body finally signed here. The issue is that's been few and far between, and that's not something you can continue to get away with. Back to the original question, my original point, I think Norvell is the guy that kids most identify with here. And I think it's great that the head coach loves recruiting and gets after it and builds relationships and is very hands-on in the sense of evaluating, do I want this kid in my program versus I'm not sure if this kid fits our program. And he's very upfront about that. He makes that comment on the regular and has for years. But my thing is I think there needs to be somebody down the food chain that basically replicates that and is similar in that manner and is great at that, because while it's great for the head coach to have a relationship with a kid, because ultimately most kids choose a program because they think that head coach will be there for their tenure, I think it's important for there to be a second person for when it's not working with the head coach, or it just needs to be another person. And I don't know that position coaches here have been phenomenal at that. Relationships have been built and kids do like their position coaches. I don't want people to take that the wrong way. I just think there can be a person that is sort of that guy in the building that kids love to go to, because there is such a strong bond there. And it's not because he's going to coach me or he determines my future. It's just because there is a bond, solely a bond. And I think that's important. And that's what recruiting coordinators in the heyday of this stuff used to be, was they were sort of like the go-to guy within the program. They were sort of a backbone piece to the structure of the personnel and the players.
And to Zach's his CEO point with Mike Norvell, I think that's part of the conversation. Is he is an asset for you as a recruiter in terms of his energy, in terms of his ability to sell his vision. I think he's a really good evaluator. Remember, we had Todd Graham on the show back in when Mike Norvell was hired. He said he's probably the best recruiter he's ever had under him on his staff as a position coach. And you want your head coach to be very active and involved in the recruiting process. But there's only so much you can do with time. So I do think that is something that, we'll go back to the offensive coordinator hire and having someone who we trust to hand over the reins to an extent that would allow him to allocate a little bit more time here and there. Other recruiters like on staff, like I think Tony Tokars does a really, really nice job with his quarterbacks. But he only does like quarterbacks in addition to some region stuff too. I think that's like when we talk about having alphas on the coaching staff roster is people who are going to go and mix it up aggressively with other position groups, guys outside of the region. Like that's one thing Kenny Dillingham was willing to do.
That's what I was going to say. Is the last guy you had like that was Kenny Dillingham. I remember. I mean, he was legitimately like the lead recruiter on like multiple other positions. Like I remember they were recruiting that running back out of Nevada, Javante Barnes, who ended up at Oklahoma, who FSU had a real shot to land if Kenny had stayed here instead of gone to Oregon that offseason. I mean, he was the lead recruiter on a running back recruit, and that like you don't have someone that's like crossing different position groups right now. Alex Atkins was the OC in title, but we didn't see him really getting heavily involved with recruitments of other offensive prospects. He was talking to kids like that, but I mean, Kenny was kind of taking the reins of recruitments, and we haven't really seen that outside of him under Mike Norvell's tenure.
Chris mentioning the role of a recruiting coordinator and more what it was in its heyday. Like, I don't know if David Johnson fits the bill of like that aggressiveness as a recruiter that you want someone kind of setting the tone with your assistant coaches as the recruiting coordinator. And I know there's more like now to the element with general manager involved and more analysts and there's more voices in the room than there have ever been in college football to kind of oversee recruiting. But you still want your recruiting coordinator to kind of have that tone setting ability. And I don't think that's David Johnson's personality. And that doesn't mean he doesn't bring value to what you do as a coaching staff. But I would like to see a change in voice, I think, as well, for the recruiting coordinator position too.
Yeah, I agree with that. I don't really understand the role there personally, and like what is done. Maybe I need to dig more into that. But yeah, I mean, we talked about this class and just how they might go without a running back if they lose Byron Lewis. Like, I mean, you ideally, if you're going to assign someone recruiting coordinator role, you probably want that to be your top recruiter on the staff or one of them.
They structure. They're in charge of like kind of running meetings and stuff. But I think that probably goes more to GM stuff now too. So even if it's a like symbolic role, like you still want
I don't think that
your best recruiter to be the one with the badge. You know what I mean? So yeah, there's things that need to be cleaned up with recruiting. I think that absolutely has to be people who live and breathe it. Has to be part of what you do moving forward. Next up for me, I think this is number 4 on the list, is basically the NFLification of your front office. And by that, I mean you beef up your support staff with evaluators who specialize in different categories. You bring in cap specialists and negotiators to assist with things like organizational efforts. I was looking into this. I know Zach's done some research, so I'll throw this to you, Zach. But real quick, I talked to someone who has a lot of NFL front office experience recently, and this stuck out to me as like one thing that colleges are doing and have always done, but as it gets more and more with the salary capification of it, and the transfer portal adds this element of free agency to it, is in the NFL, your front office is run to where you have a GM and then you have scouts, and you have scouts who scout NFL teams, right, and do advanced scouting, and then like free agencies, personnel and players in the NFL, and then you have college level scouts. And ultimately, position coaches are part of the evaluation process, but it's a finite part of it. And it's very separate from what the front office is doing, and they come in at certain times and put in their evaluation on guys, but most of the legwork, most of the actual like value and input fluctuates towards what the front office is doing with their scouts, especially like in the pre-draft process. In college football, it's totally different, to where the college coaches who are responsible for their position groups, for game planning, are also, and then recruiting and building relationships, are also focused on evaluations. And for them to be the primary evaluators in the transfer portal when you're doing all this other stuff happening throughout the year, it's way too many hats to wear. And I think that if you're Florida State, you have a chance to get out ahead of it a little bit and add more and more qualified evaluators to your staff to help take burden off of coaches, to streamline the evaluation process, especially in the transfer portal, and that's something I would like to see.
Yeah, I mean, there's the scouting, like you said. I think that's the biggest piece. I think FSU with, I mean, their two main scouts, and Rick Stockstill, who serves as their offensive scout, and then Justin Krause, who's a longtime Norvell staffer, oversees the defensive scouting for them. Like that's where you need to expand the most, in my opinion, just because of how much scouting you need to do. Those guys are involved in scouting future opponents. They're involved in scouting high school prospects and players in the transfer portal. Like there are a lot of different.
Those are all different skills too.
Yeah, absolutely. And you have basically two people, along with, I guess, some influence from, like you said, the assistant coaches, along with, the GM and some of the recruiting assistants. And even a lot of the entry point scouting for FSU is done by like student assistants. And, while that is important for those, student assistants that are trying to gain experience and get into the industry. I mean, just think about how crazy that would be if the entry level scouting and not entry level, I mean like the first scout on a player that an NFL team was interested in was done by someone who is essentially an intern, like that. You know what I mean? Like, and obviously there's different checks and balances to that in the college ranks. Like, it's not just that person scouts someone and then they get, if they don't like them, the name just gets thrown out. Obviously the staff will look at him, but it just, yeah, it's as the college game continues to move towards a more pro model, which we're seeing with revenue sharing and all the changes we've seen recently over the last 5 years, you need to start structuring your staff to support a model like that. And I think, like you brought up, the scouting department's the most important. Preparing for revenue sharing, I think is going to be important as well. And that with revenue sharing is going to come with the proposed salary cap. And I think hiring someone to manage that cap, like NFL teams do, is important. And the NFL, doing some research on it, it seems like the director of football administration role kind of oversees that part of the organization, the team salary cap. And I think FSU would be wise to get out ahead of that. And, even now with not a structured salary cap, but, you could find value in bringing in someone to do that role, because you do have kind of a self-imposed cap of the amount of money that you're able to spend on your football program via the Battle's End collective. I think FSU needs to find a negotiator, like someone that has like business experience or maybe experience in the agent world, because that is a huge part of the NIL negotiations that go on now, is having someone that is, in my opinion, an expert on that role. Not only could that potentially save you money if you're able to do it in a way that is done in a good fashion, like it could also make or break some of those negotiations. I mean, having someone with expertise, people skills in that role is vitally important, in my opinion. And then, I think as you move into just the rest of the front office, and this is unique, obviously, to college football when you compare it to the NFL, but the recruiting staff. I mean, FSU's recruiting staff could see some changes. It already has seen, some changes with Adam Van Clay being let go within the last week. He was what was his role?
Director of recruiting was his title, I believe.
Yeah, and he had different roles throughout his tenure, but he's a longtime staffer, at FSU over the last, I think, 4 or 5 years. So I'm expecting to see some changes, but I think they need to expand and make sure that they're bringing in guys onto the recruiting staff that can help, in certain regions. Like a good example of this is, I think Kewan Ratliff has been one of FSU's better, off-field recruiting staffers. He honestly, if you want to give credit to one person for them landing Kai Bates, the 4-star DB that they flipped from LSU last cycle, I think Ratliff is probably the one you point to, because he had a long relationship with Bates dating back to when Ratliff ran his own 7-on-7 organization out of Orlando. And, when Kai Bates opened up his recruitment late last cycle, FSU kind of surged to the top. And, I think he kind of led them into the driver's seat of that recruitment. And you need to find more of those types. Your off-field staffers shouldn't be the ones landing recruits for you, but they should be kind of leading the assistant coaches to water, and, finding individuals with some strong connections to hotbeds like South Florida, South Georgia, Central Florida, other areas that FSU frequently recruits would be beneficial towards building out that front office.
I think you just focus on getting as many people with specializations in the things that you need done, whether that's scouting offensive players, defensive players, salary cap structure, negotiations, building a roster. Are you going to build it with a tiered payment system? Are you going to build it with a unequal payment system where basically you pay your best talent, your best money does things? You have to have people that's their hyper specialty. I think you got to cut inefficiency out of the order. You can't have people there that don't do a whole lot. It has to be, you're good at this, we need you to do this. If you do this really well, it's going to put us in a better position. It's got to be super well organized. I look at what like Courtney Morgan at Alabama is doing, Mark Pantoni at Ohio State is doing, and the way those programs operate and the way they're crafting their front office structure. I think that is obviously at the forefront of where the future is going in collegiate athletics, especially in football.
And that does require more money, right?
Oh, yeah, wholeheartedly. Courtney Morgan's making like $2.5 million, I think, over 3 years. I want to say he's making like $800K. He's making essentially equivalent to coordinator type money. But he coordinates the entire front office, and he's essential to the operation. So, yeah.
Showing how important it is. And there's like, there's different services you can subscribe to as well, like to help out with like cap management. So there's different places you can go. You can subscribe to different scouting services as well, but like you ultimately, like I think, want a lot of that to be in-house if you're a big time program. And it's just it's become so expansive, and like the idea of like sending Derek Ray and others front office members to like the Dallas Cowboys, and I think they're doing more than just like going to a day or two. I think they're doing like Zoom calls and stuff like that as well. But like, this is something that NFL teams have hired and trained people for, and gone to school for business acumen and stuff like that, and have gone up and risen through the ranks to have a specialization, to Chris's point, in a certain role. And doing crash courses, I feel like, is not going to be a good methodology for Florida State. That's not to say that, like, for Derek Ray, like, he's done a really nice job of organizing the structure of the front office and organizing like the way official visits are done, and that's all stuff that's been markedly better under his watch. Now you have to get help for it. Like, if you're going to continue with that as like the guiding force, like help with specialization around him and for the rest of the front office to help streamline communication with the coaching staff. Like, I think that's essential for what Florida State's doing. So I think we're all kind of in agreement with NFLification of the front office and beefing up your support staff. Moving on, you have to land a blue chip quarterback prospect this cycle. I don't know if it's going to be just prep ranks or a transfer quarterback. I'm still kind of undecided of where I think you have to go there. I know where I think I'm leaning, but yeah, you got to you got to go ahead and show that you can still get a blue chip quarterback. I think they're going to get Carter Smith, but yeah, I think that's important. Agreed.
Yeah, and you just got to manage that room correctly. You got to read that room and be prepared. Whatever the next thing that is going to happen with that room, whether it's, adding Carter Smith and keeping the 2 you currently have and knowing that, or knowing that one of those might leave because of however this season played out or spring could potentially play out, and being prepared for that. You just got to be ahead on that. That's not a place where you can play catch up and get away with it, because if you mismanage it, you'll have a horrendous season. Plain and simple.
Yeah.
I'm interested, I know we talked a little bit about whether they should take a transfer or not at quarterback, I think, on a recent podcast. And
We did.
I was against it. I will say this. If Brennan Marion's the OC, I think you try and add Thomas Castellanos.
I'm okay with not taking Thomas Castellanos. I mean,
the only reason I'm saying is because it sounds like his exit from BC, there's some mixed messaging on what actually happened there. It sounds like BC was, kind of, there might have been some injury stuff, and he wasn't, wanting to run it as much with the injury or whatever. And that's a huge component of his game. So I'm a little more open to the idea, but it also depends. It sounds like he's going to command a high market from
any quarterback is going to. Any good quarterback is going to.
Yeah. If you can add him for cheap, I think he's a great fit in Marion's offense.
You just got to pick the horse that you think you can win the race with, and you got to be right about it. You can't miss.
No, we saw what a miss at quarterback looks like this.
Especially when you try to build everything around it and it all goes to shit.
And then when you overpay as well. It's a thing. All right, next up, land a high floor portal class. So this is something I wrote this morning. I feel very strongly about this. I've thought about this for a while. What? Why are you laughing at?
Duh. I mean, we know they're
not
going to
duh,
get
because last portal. No, not duh, because last portal class they went with a high ceiling one and a low floor one, and it crumbled in front of them. So
I see. Yeah, it's in the additional words, but yes, it's a necessity. It's probably the biggest necessity, honestly, because no offense to anybody out there who thinks coaching is the end all be all, and coaching is very important, but Jimmy and Joe's matter more.
Yeah, well, I think the staff got away from that, and I think I'll speak for myself. I got to a point where I saw how much players developed over time here, to where I thought I bought into the ability for them to go ahead and develop and maximize players at a really high rate.
No, on that point, you're 1,000% right. I definitely, in reviewing how I got it all so wrong, and everybody did, but hey, I'm talking about me here. There's a degree of, I just had a belief of, well, they've done a pretty good job with this. I believe they're going to continue to do a good job with this. And obviously they did not.
And they did. I think more important than whether Chris and I thought that or anything else like that is whether any talking head thought it, as the coaching staff thought that they could go ahead and sprinkle magic dust on it and they would figure it out. And that this season proved quite the opposite. And so that's everything backing way up to one of the first things Zach said when we started this list is personnel acquisition is what this is all based on. Now, when it comes to the high floor portal, let me go ahead and elaborate. We think this is going to be a massive portal class for FSU. It's going to have to be because of the prep ranks that we talked about at the top of the podcast is you're looking at maybe like a dozen high school players. And I would also, this is just some sourcing, some just common sense. You win 2 games in the season or 1 game in the season. I'm not going to count my eggs before they hatch there, my chickens before they hatch, because I already have the eggs. Let's go ahead and say that you're probably what? You want me to go faster? I'll go faster. Yeah. Okay. No, that's making me slow now. I'm losing my concentration. You're making me nervous. Basically, I think that you're going to, I don't know what I was talking about now.
You're talking about using some common sense as well as the
fact that you're going to have to take like 30 to 40 portal players just to fill the roster. And mind you, with the house ruling probably coming down too, teams are going to be able to have more than 85 scholarship players. So you can go up to 100. So you're going to take what will be by far your biggest portal class in FSU history, in Norvell era history. And they've had some big ones before too. But it's going to be massive. Like we're hearing that they're going to probably be hosting about like 30 official visitors of transfers alone in like a 2-week span in December.
Chris, you're going to have to cover those all by yourself. Okay.
I'll be there.
I'm kidding. I'm coming up. If there's 30 OVs in 1 week.
No, I think like in a 2-week span, but just transfers. Just transfers.
By the way, I heard that. So if there's some high school prospects that are signing in February, FSU can host them during those 2 weeks, and they can also host juniors during those 2 weeks as well.
That'll be all crazy.
In December.
He can cover the official visit for juniors. That's fine. With those OVs or with those transfers, I am of the mindset that like throw away the requisites. Oh, they have to be 6'3" defensive end. It has to be a 6-foot defensive back. Nope. Like just that's not where you're at as a program right now. You can't afford the luxury to have a very refined talent pool. If the guy looks like he can play football, if he's contributed to winning football any level, FCS, division, group of 4, group of 5, I'd probably not Division 2 again. We don't need to go down that route again. But if a guy's shown some requisite skills and playmaking ability, like they need to be prioritized. And if they check the boxes with what you want culturally, like that's how you're going to flip this roster is by reestablishing, getting Keir Thomases of the world throughout your roster. And that's where I think it starts. And then if you survive this year, if you get through it, hopefully the aforementioned coaching hires that you've had allow you to start recruiting the prep ranks better when you start having stuff to sell again.
Production over potential when it comes to the portal.
Chris said it much more eloquently and quicker than I did.
Kurt Signetti said it first, so it's sort of like The Office, where you use a Michael Jordan quote and then put Michael Scott.
It was Wayne Chris.
I've been checking in on like what FSU's portal strategy is going to be, and I definitely do think that they realized they made a mistake obviously by the results of the season, but
no, it's good in the face every morning.
Yeah,
but that is important, Zach.
I think they understand that they made a mistake valuing the potential over production in the
betting on Benson was a bad idea.
And more specifically, I think a lot of what this last portal class was for them was like Marvin Jones Jr., Earl Little. Those were 2 insanely high school evals for them who spent 3 years or 2 years at a college prior to transferring to FSU and pretty much didn't do anything worth a damn. And you just, added them, kind of negating, the fact that the portal is the whole point of it is so you can see what their value is in college. Like how did their game translate to college? And they far too often fell back on their high school evals on kids and trusted those evals over what they were seeing with their eyes with those players in the college ranks. They
believe they were the magic elixir to take them from what they once thought they were to what they could be.
So that's something that's something I think they'll move away from in large part, because I think that's one of the areas that they realized they made the biggest mistake.
And there's like nuance to that too. Like them taking Marvin Jones Jr., fine with that. Like if you want to take a guy, and especially now that you can go over the to 85 minutes, it's the amount of money that you probably spent on him, and the fact that he was going to be a featured player, either the first defensive end off the bench or a potential starter. And he showed in the spring like good stuff. But like I think that's where like we talk about high floor guys, you got to see on a little to help out with that. And then the issue is so that's like good practice there, right? But then the issue is that you also had Pat Payton, who you were banking on continuing his progress, and he fell off a cliff. And so there's nuance to it. The issue is you spent a ton of money on Marvin Jones Jr. and your ROI there was not very good.
Yeah.
Next one.
All right. Next one. Do you need to get out of here, Chris?
In a few minutes.
Okay. Next up, purge this roster of dead weight and bad attitudes.
Yes, you didn't do it last year. You should have.
And the issue is that there's become more of those. Like that's only gotten worse with losing.
Yeah.
Ditch the savior complex. Believe what's before your eyes and go with that.
Okay. Revamp the offensive line via the transfer portal.
Yeah. Get actual tackles.
Easier said than
You
done.
have plenty of the interior types. You can figure that out probably with what you have. And you can probably go get one or two there too, but you got to get real tackles. Like it's got to get better on the bookends, and everything else inside will probably improve alongside it. But again, with the portal, Jeremiah Byers a couple years ago was viewed as one of the better tackle options, and we all know what that's been for 2 seasons. So
Yeah, and that was like a real recruitment, like where you're having to beat out Ohio State
And Oregon. Yeah.
So like I don't know that the fix is truly there. We've talked many times on here, and Zach regularly makes a point. He is correct on this point, is that there are not great tackles in the portal. There's only so many great tackles that exist on planet Earth in a given year at collegiate level, and most of them don't end up in the portal. And the rare one that does, for you to go get them, you're gonna have to really go pay to go get them.
So one thing I'll push back, yes, like I understand it's a limited pool and it's highly unlikely. That's why you spend so much money on like a Lucas Simmons.
Carter Smith last year would have been one for them.
So
and they had a shot there.
In your practice there was very poor in how you handled that. Was it Easton Kilty? It was from one of the FCS schools out in the Dakotas. And he went to Kansas State and is a starting left tackle and has been like a 70 PFF guy all season for a top 25 team. And you passed on him. He was available early, and I'm sure if Kansas State got him, he wasn't super expensive.
But similar to your Pat Pate point, they thought Darius and Byers would be capable, good, and improved, and they could have slid one of those, but more than likely Darius, not Byers, despite the message.
That's where the practice, man, like is frustrating. Is like you at least considered like to have Carter Smith on campus to think that okay, a left tackle would be good for us to go ahead and get, and we allowed Darius or Byers to move into guard. Right. And that would just give you more flexibility, more options. And instead, they went cheap on it initially, and then they end up having to spend a ton for a Terrence Ferguson, who's only an interior offensive lineman battle against Oklahoma. And obviously that eval didn't work out. And whatever, you took a big athletic guy, and you should be taking more of those and hope you figure it out with them. And I think that's ultimately like my point is like, you kind of limited yourself with just taking a couple of transfers who are all interior offensive line guys, where you're probably going to have to like that's where you're going to have to pay up in the portal. Also, I don't have this as a point, but you're probably going to have to pay up in the portal for defensive linemen too, because your high school recruiting has been awful there, and that's going to come back to bite you this year. Oh, it's already bitten you, but it's going to bite you again next season too, and you're going to have to spend a ton on portal defensive tackles and defensive ends. So buckle up. Retain a majority of your 2023 and 2024 classes, including a quarterback. I don't think you can lose both Brock and Luke. I think at this point, Luke Romanhoek, if you had to choose, is probably just potential is what you're banking on there. He's got more time. He's got more talent. And I think you've basically said you want to retain those class.
Buyer Sinone.
Sponsored by
the Turner Group.
Do you ride with Luke the next 2 games as your primary quarterback and truly like give it the test run and make that decision post Florida game?
I'm gonna say bye, but I also don't know if it matters a ton. Like, what are you gonna?
Right. I don't think it ultimately determines anything. I think it's worthwhile to do, one, to send a messaging to Luke that
that's the value of it,
and 2, to truly say like it's your game, like you're handing the game off to him. And I know if you do that, there's a high potentially losing Brock. I get it. I don't think playing the game where you try to keep both works.
I personally love the 2 quarterback system. No, I'm kidding. I do think that the Luke, Luke playing full time would probably be good if that's who you're trying to retain out of the 2. I mean, I think ideally FSU would like to retain both, but I don't think that's likely. So if you're going to retain one of them, I think you bank on the guy that has the better, physical attributes and the better arm talent, and I think that is Luke. So I'd be in favor of them doing that. I'm interested to see what they plan to do there because obviously I don't know if we talked about it, but on the depth chart they listed them as or for the first time this season.
On the original question about 23, 24 kids, yes, you want to keep a lot of those. There's a good amount of good talent in that group, but there also are guys like a Conrad Hussey who, I think the world of his athletic ability and what he's capable of being, but maturity has to come along at some point. Edwin Joseph comes to mind, and Edwin made a massive leap from last year to this year with the way he went about his business, prepared for football, played on the field, and that was awesome to see. If you believe Hussey can do that, then sure. but it's not one of these where you just like you bank on it because he said he would. Like it's to me, it's got to be a deep dive on whether or not a guy like that is worth retaining within your program, because he is talented, but is he ultimately going to buy into what he has to be in order to cash in on that talent?
Yeah, I think overall with the 23 and 24 classes, FSU feels like a hit on a lot of those players. And I mean, those are going to be, if you're going to turn this thing around, those are going to be the players you're building it around. So yes, you need to retain the majority of them. But to Chris's point, like there are some that I would be surprised if Conrad Hussey is a part of this program next year.
So let's move that into the final point, because Chris has to get out of here in 2 minutes, and I'll let Chris, we'll segue into it here. It's a great transition. My final point is there needs to be a drastic philosophical shift in Mike Norvell's, basically his accountability methodology across the board, how he holds people and players accountable.
Using Hussey as the example to continue it, maturity is a weird thing. It comes at different speeds for different people. And I'm not one to always think you pull out the rug and you move on from it and you give up. At the end of the day, Conrad Hussey is still a second-year college player. He's still a relatively young man. But, like, it has to be, like, a sit-down conversation that you walk away from and the decision is made one way or the other. And there's no room. Like, there's no room for moving off of it. If he stays and he shows any glimmer of the stuff you're over and you're tired of and is not going to allow him to maximize who and what he's going to be, you cut bait and you move on. Plain and simple. It's cutthroat, but it has to be cutthroat. When you're structuring a talent roster that you're going to be paying real money dollars for, and it's going to be, you have to balance it. It has to be cutthroat as hell. Like, I know that's insensitive and not who gives that, it has to be.
If it was pre-NIL era,
matter of fact about it.
If it was pre-NIL era, I would be all with you about having, the sit down talk and trying to work things out and trying to, make sure that you're getting the most out of your player. But Conrad Hussey, like many others on this roster, makes a ton of money. So this is it's a business now. This is a business decision, and FSU has to. I mean, they don't feel comfortable playing Conrad Hussey like that. And he's probably one of the more talented DBs on their roster. And they can't play him because he's not trustworthy. So I think they're past my thought is that they're past that point of that you can return from that.
You don't have time for that if you're Mike Norvell. Like you don't have time for that. There's too many other people's jobs that are on the line, and the
there's also a degree of making an example of a guy usually resolves the situation in future moments.
And I think this whole the accountability aspect, I push that to that's coaches too. Zach's hinted at this before, lapses in communication with recruits and just stuff that's unacceptable.
I mean, just look at the results of recruiting. That should not be okay. The DN board being the DN board, the same thing every cycle should not happen. That should not be the case. And there's no accountability, and it doesn't change.
Well, we have seen the ultimate accountability, and that's people starting to get fired, and we'll see if that continues throughout.
That's only because they started losing.
Yeah,
but they lost because of what they did. They built a path to where they got to.
All right, so Chris, you got to get out of here. We're going to talk about some recruiting, coaching. I'm waiting for Chris to go. Get out of here. Get. No one wants you here. All right, we'll go into some coaching tidbit stuff real quick, Zachary. Let's get into it. FSU has an offensive coordinator and defensive coordinator to hire. This is what people want to hear about. I will say this is not my specialty. I'm not a agent source and that's typically how this stuff's going to come to fruition. And I don't have a ton of coaching contacts across the country. I have some, but that's not what I do. That's not my strengths. But we have at least pooled all of our resources together. And I will say this has been a very loud in the last few days from different sources and different angles. The name Brennan Marion keeps coming up as the offensive coordinator, lead candidate, I guess is what I would describe at this point.
Yeah. I've heard that from different levels of FSU's program, from people outside the program. And to Brennan's point, I'm not this is not my specialty. I mean, we're hoping to grow in that aspect to be able to cover coaching change. But to be honest, we haven't had a lot of opportunity to do so. Or at
No,
least
this is new for us, other
Yeah.
than the head coaching change back in 2020.
that was basically my first year on the job. So yeah, I think it's interesting that Brennan Marion's name continues to come up. Obviously, there are clear ties to Mike Norvell with Brennan Marion. Norvell coached him at Tulsa when Marion was a receiver there, and Norvell was his GA. If you listen to Marion do interviews, he talks about how Norvell used to wake him up at 5 a.m. every morning to make sure that he essentially wouldn't fail. Like, he guaranteed his success is how Marion puts it. And Marion actually says that's how he took that from Norvell and how he coaches his players now on a more personal level. So yeah, I mean, they have a strong relationship by all accounts. Marion was hired at Arizona State as the GA under Norvell, I believe, one of their offensive GAs there in 2015. And then Marion's gone on to have a successful career of his own, was at Pittsburgh when Jordan Addison was there, moves over to Texas for a year, then has been at UNLV for the last 2 years running his go-go offense.
Yeah, so that's the name that is just popping up the most right now. We've heard some stuff with Joe Craddock. Yeah, I'm not entirely sure how. I don't want to go ahead and guess right now, but I do think, just based on if we're just going to where we're hearing the most names, or the same name the most often, and from where it's coming from, like, it does seem to be Brennan Marion right now. Defensive coordinator, we did get a pretty good lead from someone connected to the agency world, who said that Scott Simons, the SMU defensive coordinator, has been linked to the FSU job. We'll see. There's not a ton of volume coming there, so I don't know how much stock to put in there, but it does make sense. Like, he's done a nice job with SMU's defense. He has ties to Mike Norvell. He coached under him at Memphis. So yeah, that's someone who would make sense. So that's something that, okay, we'll listen to that.
If you had to grade, hypothetically,
okay,
the Brennan Marion OC hire, what would be your grade?
First, all right. Caveat, crapshoot. This is all a crapshoot. Head coaching hires are crapshoots. Coordinator hires are crapshoots. We're going to evaluate this by fit, right? And back at the top, we said we want an offensive coordinator who could run his own offense. All right, Brennan Marion has created his own offense. And this isn't just I think people think it's just a UNLV thing. Like, he was doing this at the FCS level a decade ago, and then start getting big boy position coaching jobs at the Power 5, or Power 5 then, now Power 4 level. I think it was at Howard, and they actually beat UNLV in his first game as an offensive coordinator, implementing the go-go offense then, to what was at the time, I think it still might be, the biggest upset in point spread history.
It was 40 points, right?
I think even more than that. It may have been 42. It was a ton. And they beat UNLV. And the irony is that he's at UNLV now, running the go-go offense, a decade later. But this isn't some new thing. He's had this and been marinating on it, and been this isn't just something he just threw in there. So you want a guy who can run his own offense. Well, this guy's created his own offense. So I like that, right? That's cool. Someone who can help. You want to talk about evaluating, emphasizing recruiting, and who can elevate the floor with recruiting. Some of the stuff that he did at Texas, and I know you have the Texas logo, and that's carrying weight, but you know what that's like. You know what it's like to go ahead and win a battle for a blue chip recruit. Let's pull up some of his stuff real quick.
Yeah, I know them off the top of my head. He landed 5-star wide receiver Jonte Cook, who's now actually in the transfer portal. Ooh. He landed 2 other blue chip receivers at Texas, Ryan Niblett and DeAndre Moore. DeAndre Moore is a rotational receiver for Texas right now. I think Niblett is a redshirt freshman, so he hasn't seen much burn. But hey, if you could get some Texas receivers to come out to FSU, that'd be nice. Obviously, Jordan Addison he didn't recruit Jordan Addison, but Jordan Addison had his best season in college under Marion as his receivers coach.
So he can develop.
Yeah. And Xavier Worthy also had a really nice season under Marion, in which, led him to be drafted high. And obviously Worthy's one of the fastest players that we've seen in football. And yeah, I mean, that he's got the recruiting acumen that I think is the best out of the offensive coordinator options for Florida State that we know of, that we think they'd be in the market for. And that's why that's the biggest selling point to me of Brennan Marion, along with his go-go offense, which I think would be a unique fit to what Mike Norvell likes to do. Because if you look at the splits, I mean, the go-go, aside from the weird formational stuff with the two running back sets, both on the same side of the field, like if you look at how much they're running the ball versus passing, like we know Mike Norvell traditionally likes to run the ball more than he likes to pass it. And that's definitely the case for the go-go offense. I think maybe a little bit, an extreme. Like I think, some seasons they've been like 63 to, 37 or whatever, like percentage of run to pass. And, you probably want to get more towards, a more balanced attack. But I think the
ideology.
That's what I was trying to say.
What are you, me?
We're an hour in. Yeah.
Split up in your words.
I think they kind of match between Norvell and Marion. And I think that FSU's personnel would fit pretty well with what Marion would bring in offensively. I think, Norvell loves to use multiple running backs, and, Marion, obviously that's a huge component of his offense. It sounds like from watching some of his informational videos about the offense, the blocking schemes for the offensive line aren't super difficult. It's basically 4 different running schemes that they have to learn how to block. And he said the biggest challenge was basically making sure the running backs didn't like crisscross and run over each other out of the backfield with that weird formation. But yeah, I mean, I definitely think it's, to me, the most intriguing hire they can make. And that might be a good thing for, a school that's going to need something to sell. And I think Brennan Marion, if you look at him and his career, like he does a lot of interview opportunities. He takes, a lot of chances to go out, to these coaching conventions and kind of teach his offense. Like he's a good self-promoter. And some people might view that in a negative light, but I honestly think that might be a good fit for what FSU needs right now on the recruiting trail, and just, in the context of where their program is and how it's perceived by recruits and just, people nationally, fans. Like I think you need some excitement, and I think he would definitely bring that.
Yeah, I think that if we're looking at the grading scale, like there is the self-promotion aspect. I don't know if that's a bad thing necessarily either. Like Kenny Dillingham was self-promoted too. Like, I mean, that's just, you're promoting yourself, and I think that some ways that's looked at that's looked negatively in society. But there's also a level of confidence that comes with that. And someone like Brennan Marion has talked about this, is like he's had to come up through, like he's self-made. When you talk about, he was a high school coach at 4 different high schools before he got his first college job, and he was at like Division II level. And he wasn't someone, I think it's almost like an overcompensation for where he was early in his career, because he wasn't considering that type of stuff. And he finally saw the value of getting out his name and his vision out there, how valuable that could be. And now we've seen his star rise. So I'm not going to hate on that. I actually think that might be valuable to your point of where they could be. I do think the actual offense itself, if I'm going, like, there is a huge like variance there of whether it could work at the P4 level. And to some extent, I ding that hire, if that were to be the hire for that. As much as I'm intrigued by it, and I'm going to be really, like, if I were to cover that, I'd be very excited to cover it. But I would ding it. So I guess I would give it, like, I don't know, Zach, like an A-. I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, an A- hypothetical of something that may or may not happen that we don't know for sure, in all seriousness.
I think it's fair. I would probably go B+.
Also, I was going to be B+, A- is where I was going to skew down that way. But I like it. I like the hire. I'm intrigued by it. I know it's not a slam dunk. I'm going to talk to some people in the industry who are like, I don't know if Brennan Marion's going to be a great offensive coordinator at the P4 level. People have talked about that, but we don't know, because what he's doing is so different.
I mean, right now, obviously he's at a G4, G5 program at UNLV, and they score 40 points per game this season. That's coming off a successful 2023 campaign as well. So yeah, I mean, it's a really prolific offense everywhere he's been. And his most recent stop, I mean, you can only judge him based off what he's done. He hasn't had the chance to run it at the P4 level, like you're saying, but everywhere he's been, and if you're judging by the most recent data, like it's worked really well. And also some of the adversity that he's had to overcome running the offense. I mean, look at this season. His starting quarterback from last year transferred. I think Jaden Maiva transferred to USC after last season, after having a successful year under Marion's offense. Transferred to USC, and then his starting quarterback for this season, there was the huge debacle at the beginning of the year where he wanted more NIL money, so he entered the transfer portal, Matthew Sluka, and they're starting a backup, and that backup has performed even better than the starter did. So I mean, he's had to overcome some adversity, and the offense is still putting up 40 points per game.
And looking at it too, there are only 2 losses this year. 3-point loss to Syracuse, and then a 5-point loss to Boise State. And so it's a team that's been successful and is turning around, but they beat Kansas, and Kansas is actually figuring out now. They beat Houston. They've gone and punched, and Houston's not great, but they've punched up in level of competition this year. And I think especially as FSU's revamping its roster, and I think that's what we talk about fit, is FSU's revamping its roster. His offense, if it works, gives you the chance to raise the floor. Obviously, anything's going to be an upgrade from this season. But in terms of being able to his offense can maximize, you don't have to have a great offensive line, I guess what I'm trying to say. And you can have a quarterback with some deficiencies, and it's a college offense. And people say it's gimmicky. I don't think that's fair necessarily. But it is a college offense that helps you hide some deficiencies. And you're probably still going to have a roster that is ripe with deficiencies in 2025, no matter what you do in the portal. So I think it could help you out there. Interested to see. There is a chance. Let's say it is him, right? Let's say all the rumors and we're spending a lot of time on something that might be. Let's say it is him. Mike Norvell has talked, Zach, about wanting to wait for championship games, basically, right, to come through before they go ahead and announce something. As it stands right now, UNLV is in the championship race for their conference, but they're not currently in the number 2 spot because they've lost to Boise State. Colorado State is currently number 2 in the conference because they're undefeated in the conference, and they haven't played Boise State, nor will they play Boise State. So they don't have to do that. So basically what we're looking at here is in the next 2 weeks, if UNLV loses a game this weekend, they'd be eliminated. And basically we go the next 2 weeks without Colorado State losing a game, they'll be eliminated. So there's a chance that if it is Brennan Marion, that the announcement is made before championship game weekend, if UNLV's not ended up in their conference title game, which would honestly be a really good thing for Florida State because you get some finality to that.
Yeah, and you could possibly get someone in before early signing period, which is 4 days after the last game of the season against Florida.
Yep. So it'd be a best case scenario to go ahead and have that and have a chance to retain some of the guys you want to retain in this class. Give you a puncher's chance.
Let's root for a UNLV loss, guys.
Yeah. Who they play this weekend? It doesn't matter. All right, let's end on that. For Zach Blostein, for Chris Nee, I'm Brendan Sinone. Thanks to Chattanooga Whiskey, as well as the Turner Group. This has been On the Bench. We'll talk to you guys next week.